Japan has the fastest bullet trains on Earth. It has vending machines on mountain hiking trails. It has convenience stores open at 3 in the morning that sell hot food, cold sake, and paperback novels. It has cities so clean that tourists photograph the streets. It has a reputation, carefully maintained and largely accurate, for being one of the most efficiently functioning societies in the world. Underneath that is another Japan, one that has been quietly emptying out for decades. The country has over 9 million empty homes, and by 2038, that number is projected to reach 23 million. Entire coal towns have been swallowed by forest. Islands that once held thousands now hold almost no one. Ferry services that ran for over a century have been quietly cancelled. That story is real, and it matters. But it is not the whole story. Scattered across Japan in places that do not appear in travel guides and rarely appear in the news, there are people who stayed. People who looked at the same forces driving everyone else out and arrived at a different conclusion. The question is why? Why does someone choose to remain on a volcanic island that the helicopter cannot reach half the days of the year? Why does someone rebuild by hand in a village the government has recommended abandoning? Why does someone stay in a city that has officially declared itself bankrupt, with fewer neighbors every year and no particular promise that it gets better? The Japanese word for what they cannot bring themselves to leave is Kokyo. It means roughly one's hometown or birthplace, but the translation misses something. Kokyo is not a location on a map. It is closer to a thing that a person contains, the place that cannot be substituted. 15 towns, 15 different answers to the same question. Let's start at number 15. Number 15. Niijima is technically part of Tokyo. If you said that to someone on the island, they might let it go without argument, or they might look at you the way people look at a statement that is technically accurate and entirely misleading. The island sits 93 miles, or 150 kilometers, south of the city it belongs to administratively, reachable by overnight ferry when the seas cooperate. It has its own obsidian glass beaches, found almost nowhere else in Japan. It has a culture, a rhythm, and a sense of separateness that no administrative classification has managed to dissolve. What most visitors do not know is that for much of the Edo period, Niijima served as a place of political exile. Writers, intellectuals, and dissidents who had made themselves inconvenient to the authorities were sent here specifically because the ferry was the only way out, and it did not run on demand. The isolation was the punishment. The island was the sentence. The people who live there now chose it. The distance that was once imposed as a penalty is the thing they protect. The island was built to hold people against their will. The people who live there now are the ones who decided to stay. Niijima's isolation was once used as a punishment. Number 14's is a policy, and it is working. Number 14. Kamakatsu is a mountain village in Tokushima Prefecture with a population of approximately 1,500. It sits in the kind of steep, forested terrain that has been exporting its young people to cities for 50 years, a pattern so consistent across rural Japan that demographers no longer bother noting it as unusual. Kamakatsu was following that pattern until the early 2000s, when the village made a decision that was either visionary or impractical, depending on your prior assumptions. It declared a goal of producing zero landfill waste. The result was a sorting system of 45 separate categories. Paper alone is divided into multiple subcategories. Glass is sorted by color. Burnables are separated from recyclables with a specificity that initially strikes most visitors as impossible to sustain. It has been sustained for over 2 decades. The village has not used an incinerator or a landfill in years. Young people have begun moving there, not despite the sorting system, but because of it. They move for the sense that the isolation is being used to build something that actually works. Most villages lose their young people to cities. Kamakatsu is losing them to a recycling program. But not all of them leave. Some stay to see whether the experiment holds. The island at number 13 has 60 people left. All of them are watching their island become something that has never existed before. Number 13. Inujima is a small island in the Saito Inland Sea with a population of approximately 60 people, most of them elderly, none of them likely to be replaced. The island once had a working copper smelter built in 1909 to process ore from mines in the Chigoku region. The smelter operated for 10 years before the collapse of copper prices after the First World War made it unviable. It closed in 1919 and was left largely intact, chimneys and all, for nearly 90 years. In 2008, architect Hiroshi Sambichi and artist Yukinori Yanagi converted the copper smelter ruins into the Inujima Seirensho Art Museum, using the original chimneys as natural ventilation systems and the industrial infrastructure as structural elements. The museum now draws visitors from across Japan and internationally. The island has become part of the Setouchi Triennale, a rotating festival of site-specific art installations across the inland sea islands. The 60 residents who remain are the living context for everything visitors come to see. They remember what the smelter was. They remember what the island was before it became an art destination. The museum exists because the ruins existed. The residents are the reason the ruins had a story worth preserving. What holds the people at number 12 is different. It is not memory, it is obligation, and it runs back 4 centuries. Number 12. The villages of Shirakawago and Gokayama sit in mountain valleys on the border of Gifu and Toyama prefectures, cut off from the surrounding lowlands by some of the heaviest snowfall in Japan. Roads into the valleys were not reliably accessible year-round until relatively recently. For centuries, the communities inside them were, for months at a time, essentially sealed. The architecture that developed in response to that isolation is what UNESCO inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 1995. The Gasho Zukuri farmhouses, Gasho Zukuri meaning hands in prayer, in reference to the steep, pitched roofs designed to shed the weight of snow that would collapse a flatter structure, are the most visible result of living in a place where the weather makes most conventional building forms impossible. Some of these structures are over 400 years old. What is less visible but more important is the reason they are still standing. The roofs require rethatching every 30 to 40 years, a task that cannot be completed by a single household. The tradition of YUI, meaning mutual aid and collective labor, exists in these villages because the buildings demanded it. If you leave, your neighbor's roof will eventually fail. If enough people leave, the collective capacity to maintain the structures disappears entirely, and the buildings follow within a generation. The buildings are famous. The reason they are still standing is the people inside them. Number 11's people stayed under different pressure. They were fighting something invisible. It took 13 years. Number 11. Toshima is a small island in the Seto Inland Sea with a population of approximately 800 people. In the late 1970s and through the 1980s and the 1990s, industrial waste was secretly dumped on the island by a processing company operating without proper permits. The dumping continued for nearly 2 decades, accumulating approximately 500,000 tons of contaminated material, including industrial sludge, waste oil, and materials containing heavy metals. The waste was buried and concealed. Residents who raised concerns were largely ignored by Kagawa prefecture officials. The residents organized, documented, fought, and eventually, after 13 years of legal and political campaigning, won. In 2000, Kagawa prefecture accepted responsibility and agreed to remove all contaminated waste. The cleanup continued until 2017. In 2010, the Toshima Art Museum opened near the former dump site, built into the hillside and designed by architect Ryue Nishizawa as a structure with no interior walls and an opening to the sky, through which rain falls directly onto the floor. The most contaminated island in the Seto Inland Sea is now home to one of Japan's most visited art museums. The residents are the reason either of those things is true. The island at number 10 has a different problem entirely. It cannot be cleaned up. It has been erupting since before anyone alive can remember. Number 10. Suwanosejima is part of the Tokara Islands, a chain of remote volcanic islands between Kyushu and Okinawa. The island's population sits at approximately 70 people. Its stratovolcano, Ontakeyama, erupts regularly, multiple times in most years, and the island has been periodically evacuated when eruption intensity has required it. Each time the most dangerous phase passes, most residents return. The practical explanation is agricultural. The volcanic soil on Suwanosejima produces yields that few alternative locations can match, and the residents who have farmed it for generations have accumulated knowledge specific to this particular soil chemistry, this particular elevation, this particular microclimate. The less practical explanation is simpler. The island is the only world most of them have ever known. The volcano is part of it in the same way that weather is part of any landscape. You do not leave a place because it has weather. The volcano has been erupting since before anyone alive can remember. The residents have been coming back for just as long. Number 9 has no volcano. What it has is a degree of isolation so complete that the most significant event of the 20th century arrived there weeks after it happened. Number 9. Shiba is a mountain village in Miyazaki Prefecture, reached by roads that wind through gorges and dense forest in the interior of Kyushu. The infrastructure that connects most of Japan to most of Japan ends some distance before it reaches Shiba. In August 1945, when Japan surrendered to the Allied powers following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, news of the surrender reached Shiba weeks after the fact. The village had not been informed. The war had simply ended without it. That story has made Shiba something of a curiosity in the records of post-war Japan. What it actually represents is something more prosaic, a place so far outside the infrastructure of modern communication that events of national significance passed through it on a delay, as through a very long pipe. Today, Shiba's population has fallen to a few hundred. The specific agricultural traditions that developed there, including livestock breeds and farming methods adapted to the steep, heavily forested terrain, are sustained by the people who remain. That knowledge cannot be downloaded. It cannot be accessed from a city. It lives where the people who carry it live. The village missed the end of the war. It has been making up its own timeline ever since. Number 8 is at the physical southern edge of Japan. Below it, there is open ocean. The people who live there have been looking at that view for centuries and found it sufficient. Number 8. Hateruma is Japan's southmost inhabited island, located in Okinawa Prefecture at the far end of the Yaeyama Islands chain. Its population is approximately 480 people. The high-speed ferry from the nearest larger island, Ishigaki, takes between 1 and 2 hours in calm conditions, which do not always prevail. Rough seas cancel sailings frequently enough that residents plan around it as a matter of routine. The island has its own distinct awamori tradition. Awamori is Okinawa's native distilled spirit, distinct from mainland sake in its production method and in its use of Thai long-grain rice rather than Japanese short-grain varieties. Hateruma produces a local variety specific to its particular climate and water. The island also hosts a star-watching facility that takes advantage of one of the lowest levels of light pollution in Japan. The skies over Hateruma are darker than those over most of the country. These are not incidental features. They are the terms of the island's existence, the specific things it offers that cannot be replicated somewhere with more convenient ferry connections. Hateruma is the last inhabited island before open ocean. The residents know exactly what that means and have decided it is enough. Everything on this list so far has been about places that are losing people. Number 7 is the one that found a way to stop. Number 7. Amacho sits on the island of Nakanoshima in the Oki Islands, a cluster of islands in the Sea of Japan off the coast of Shimane Prefecture. Its population is approximately 2,200 people. Through the 1990s and the 2000s, it was declining at a rate consistent with projections that had the community effectively non-functional by the middle of this century. What happened next is documented in government reports, academic papers, and rural policy research across multiple countries. Beginning around 2008, Amacho's administration introduced a set of changes that were, in the context of rural Japanese governance, unusual to the point of being radical. Subsidized housing for arrivals with no prior connection to the island. Guaranteed employment, structured around industries the island could actually sustain. A deliberate system for integrating newcomers into the community rather than leaving them to manage the isolation alone. Young people began arriving. Some came from Tokyo, some came from abroad. The rate of population decline slowed and in some years reversed. This is where the word kokyo requires a second definition. Kokyo is usually translated as one's hometown or birthplace, the irreplaceable place that shaped a person. But Amacho is full of people whose kokyo, by that definition, is somewhere else entirely. They came for a program and stayed for a community. They built a kokyo from scratch. That is the pivot this list has been building toward. The question of why people stay does not always have a historical answer. Sometimes someone built the conditions of staying deliberately, and it worked. Amacho made staying possible through design. Number 6 proves that even a full government evacuation order is not always enough to make people accept that the staying is over. Number 6. Kuchino-Erebishima is a volcanic island in Kagoshima Prefecture with a population of approximately 100 people. In May 2015, the Shindake volcano produced a major eruption that triggered a full government evacuation. Every resident was relocated to the mainland. The island was officially inaccessible. Over the following years, as volcanic activity decreased to levels that could permit habitation, residents began petitioning to return. The process was bureaucratic, cautious, and slow. Residents interviewed during the evacuation period described losing the structure of their daily lives, their relationships with neighbors, the work that gave their days shape. The mainland was safer. It was warmer in winter. It had hospitals within reasonable distance. It was not where they were from. Formal repopulation began in stages. Most of those who had been evacuated returned when permitted to do so. After the eruption and government evacuation, residents spent years filling out paperwork and navigating approvals to go back. Number 5 didn't need a volcano to empty out. It had something the Japanese government considers almost as serious. It went completely bankrupt, and a small number of young people are now moving there on purpose. Number 5. Yubari is not an island. It is a city in central Hokkaido that ran out of reasons to be a city and became one anyway, through inertia and the stubborn attachment of the people who stayed. In the 1960s, Yubari was the coal capital of Hokkaido with a population of approximately 120,000 people. When Japan shifted from coal to imported oil through the 1970s, the mines began closing. By the time the last colliery shut in 1990, the population had already fallen to 21,000. It now sits at approximately 6,000, the majority of them elderly. In the late 1970s, the city's officials attempted to pivot to tourism, building museums and leisure facilities on borrowed money. Few visitors came. The debt mounted. In 2007, Yubari became the first municipality in Japan to formally declare bankruptcy. Half of the city's government officials resigned within weeks. What Yubari has now that it did not have 10 years ago is a small but documented inflow of young arrivals. They come for the price of land, which is extremely low. They come for the specific honesty of a place that has nothing left to perform. The city has nothing left to pretend. It ran out of optimism before it ran out of real estate. Yubari is the most honest city in Japan. It ran out of everything else first. From Yubari, the nearest major city is hours away. From number 4's Western Cliff, you can see a foreign country. You cannot see the Japanese mainland at all. Number 4. Yonaguni is Japan's westernmost inhabited island. Positioned at a distance, its residents have never been allowed to fully ignore. The nearest city is on Okinawa's main island group, 311 miles, or 500 kilometers, away. The coast of Taiwan is 69 miles, or 111 kilometers away. On clear days, Taiwan's mountains are visible from the cliffs on the island's western edge. Yonaguni has its own native horse breed, the Yonaguni horse, one of the rarest in Japan, small and extremely hardy, adapted over centuries to the island's terrain. Beneath the water off the island's southern coast sit geological formations that have been the subject of ongoing dispute since the 1980s between researchers who believe they are natural and those who believe they show evidence of human shaping. No consensus has been reached. What is not in dispute is Yonaguni's cultural orientation. The island's history is tied to the Ryukyu Kingdom, the independent maritime state that controlled the arc of islands now called Okinawa until Japan formally annexed it in 1879. That history faces west. toward trade routes and relationships that predate the Japanese administrative category by centuries. On a clear day from Yonaguni, you can see a country that is not Japan. That has always been the more relevant view. Number 3 is 621 miles from Tokyo, reachable only by a 24-hour boat ride. Number 3. The Ogasawara Islands, also known as the Bonin Islands, sit 621 miles, or 1,000 kilometers, south of Tokyo. There are no commercial flights. The only access is by ferry, a voyage of approximately 24 hours, running roughly once a week. The islands were inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2011 in recognition of their ecosystems, which developed in isolation from the Asian continent and include species found nowhere else on Earth. In the early 19th century, before Japan had formally claimed the islands, a group of settlers arrived by sea. They were American, British, and Hawaiian in origin, drawn by the whaling industry and the practical reality that the islands were uninhabited and offered reliable fresh water. When Japan formally incorporated the islands in the Meiji era and conducted a census, these settlers were given Japanese citizenship. Their descendants still live there. Some carry surnames that are not Japanese. All of them speak Japanese. The ferry to Tokyo takes 24 hours in each direction, and Tokyo is not a place they would describe as home. The Bonin Islands are technically part of Tokyo. Nobody who lives there would describe them that way. Aogashima's families have been on their island for nearly 200 years. Number 2 has been trying to empty for 40 years longer than that. It has not yet managed it. Number 2. Aogashima is a volcanic island in the Philippine Sea, 224 miles, or 360 kilometers, south of the Japanese mainland, technically within the administrative boundaries of Tokyo. Its population is approximately 170 people. The island sits inside a caldera, a wide volcanic depression several kilometers across. Inside that caldera sits a second, smaller volcanic cone called Maruyama, which is still active. Access is by helicopter, available when weather permits, which is roughly half of all days in a given year. On the other days, the helicopter does not fly, and the island is unreachable. A small boat service operates under similar constraints. In 1785, Aogashima's volcano erupted catastrophically. Approximately half the island's population died. The survivors were evacuated to Hachijojima, an island farther north. For 29 years, Aogashima sat empty. In 1814, the first residents returned. They have been there since. The caldera is still active. The community inside it has been active longer. What makes number 1 different from everything else on this list is that the reason for leaving was not a slow economic decline, not a volcano, not decades of demographic drift. It was a single day, 14 months ago, and a government recommendation that most residents declined to follow. Number 1. On January 1st, 2024, a magnitude 7.6 earthquake struck the Noto Peninsula in Ishikawa Prefecture. The timing was noted everywhere, the first day of a new year, the fireworks still recent. Suzu, at the furthest tip of the peninsula, was among the areas of worst destruction. Roads collapsed, houses fell, water and power were cut for weeks. The Japanese government, assessing the damage against the backdrop of the peninsula's pre-existing demographic decline, an aging population, and a rural economy that had been contracting for decades, began advising residents of certain areas to consider permanent relocation rather than rebuilding in place. The logic was not unkind. Some of the infrastructure required to support a community in the most severely damaged areas would cost more to restore than the number of remaining residents could justify. The calculation was demographic as much as economic. Some people accepted that logic and left. Others did not, and made clear they would not. In the months after the earthquake, residents were documented returning to collapsed structures and beginning to clear rubble by hand. Younger people who had moved to cities, sometimes years before, came back to help and in some cases stayed. Building permits were filed. Arguments were made, in community meetings and in letters and in the practical daily act of staying and working, that the calculation was wrong, that a community is not a cost-benefit analysis, that what would be lost by leaving was not something the reconstruction estimate had a line item for. For Suzu, the answer is the most direct on this entire list. A community exists only for as long as the people inside it decide it does. The earthquake damaged the buildings. The question was whether it would end the community. For the residents who stayed, that was never a question with two possible answers. The government recommended they go. They filed building permits instead. Japan has over 9 million empty homes. The forces behind that number are not reversing quickly, and the projections do not suggest they will. But the 15 places on this list exist as evidence that the question of whether to stay is not answered uniformly, or by the same logic, or for the same reasons. Some people stayed because the soil was fertile, some because the sky was dark enough to see the stars, some because they had fought once for the right to be there and were not willing to give it back, some because exile, when they tried it, turned out to be worse than the volcano, some because someone designed the conditions of staying deliberately, and it worked, and some because leaving would have ended something that is not replaceable by anything available anywhere else. That is what Kokyo means, in the end. Not the place on the map, the thing you carry that cannot be put somewhere else. Somewhere on Aogashima tonight, the helicopter did not fly, and the sea is too rough for the boat. The island is unreachable. Inside the caldera, in a house that has been lived in for more than 200 years, there is a light on. That is the whole answer. That is all of it.